How many of you have wanted to turn a peppermill but haven't yet? Bunch of you. Okay, I'm going to tell you why it took me so long to turn a peppermill. Because I thought it was going to be hard. And really, I got to be honest with you, if you get past the idea of the measuring, it's an easy project. Now there are a lot of steps, but it's easy. And if I can do it, anybody can do it. Most of it is boring. Most of it is drilling. And when I started with the club, I had been turning pins, and I had turned a few game calls and things like that, but I wanted to learn how to turn other things. This was one of them. For those of you that don't know, I used to travel the barbecue circuit. So when I came to wood turning, I went to my wood pile and my cherry that I'd been using to smoke with and started crying because I realized I had been burning curly cherry. And I couldn't salvage it. It was already gone. I tried. It almost hurt me, a couple of the things that I tried. But one of the first things that attracted me when I got past pins was peppermills. It's related to cooking. Okay, I like to cook. Salt mills, things like that. So I thought, gee, I really want to do that. And I talked to one of our members, and we have to, those of us that have a little more experience, I'm going to say this, and I'm not going to point anybody out. We have to be careful with what we say with new people. Because when I said I want to learn how to turn a peppermill, I got scared all over again because I heard, oh, there's a lot of that. You got to be really accurate with that. You don't. Okay? You don't have to be accurate. I'll show you how. But first I want to talk about design. That's one of the things that I think we fail as a club, is we don't talk enough about design and the golden rule, the golden ratio and all that. And learning your eye and trying to figure out what it is that is pleasing, not just to you, but to anyone. Now, Carl Huser, who's not here today, couldn't be here today, he and I talked just the other day. I went and visited him while he was at Fresh at lunchtime this week. He and I talked. We can go too far the other way with that too, okay? We need to be concerned about design. We need to be concerned about the ratios, but we really need to be more concerned with where we want to be rather than where Mike thinks I should be or where Tom thinks I should be. I should be less concerned. I want their opinions, but as you, I hesitate to use the word evolve because I'm not an evolutionist, but as you evolve as a turner, you're going to learn that, yeah, you really want their input to learn and to get better at what you do. And I want to take some of the things that I've learned from Mike, and I want to take some of the things that I've learned from Tom, and I want to become my own turner. And in doing that, you're going to achieve some of the design things. So I guess what I'm saying is, for those of you that are fairly new, listen and learn, and then learn to vet that and come up with your own ideas, okay? So by the time I actually quit being scared of turning a peppermill, I had been looking at a lot of them online. I mean, tons of them. I would save pictures to my computer, I'd go back and I'd look, and I would pick the ones that I really liked the design of, but I wanted to create my own design. I really, really did. I didn't want to just copy someone. Now, you're kind of limited in the space that you're in. You're kind of limited with the peppermill because you've only got so much canvas. And I thought, boy, how am I going to do that? Well, how much canvas do you have for a bowl? How much canvas do you have for all the other turnings? You're only limited by what you limit yourself on, okay? And what I decided I wanted to do is I wanted to be simple. Beads have their place, don't get me wrong, and I've got the beading tools and I've turned beads and all that. Beads have their place. This is a really plain piece of wood, but I don't know whether you can see it on camera or not, but it has some figure. It's got some chatoyance here, okay? I would rather show that off than to show off my beadwork. Now, you go buy a peppermill at, you know, on the landing for 40 bucks, you're going to get beads because it's the traditional peppermill. If you start looking online at people that are turning them, you're going to find all kinds of styles. So, I couldn't find the first one I turned. I really like figured woods for Peppermills. Now this is spalted hackberry, I think. It might be maple. I think it's hackberry. Pretty, isn't it? Pretty piece of wood. Okay. Well, this was, I do things in prototypes. And again, go back to you Woodturners. To make things easier on you, when you're worried about turning something, think about prototypes. How many prototypes does somebody in the industrial world, how many prototypes do they make before they actually come upon the finished product? Now, be nice. There's the cap. This was my second or third. I took this in and my wife said, no. I'm not going to draw the attention to it, but those of you that are in the room that are being 14-year-old boys, you know what I'm talking about. So I had to go back to the drawing board. John Telefero and Mike Ilkew were in their mushroom phase. And I thought, boy, it'd be cool to turn a mushroom cap. And I went to the shop, and this was prototype about 4. And it kind of looks like a mushroom. And I went in and I showed it to my wife. And she said, no. Now again, I don't have the first one that I turned. It was walnut, and it was a pretty piece of wood. It wasn't figured, luckily. You know, and again, with the prototypes, I didn't use a lot of real pretty wood. But with the first one, the body of it was pretty good, but the cap, she said, well, honey, it's kind of pretty, but the cap looks a little bit like a suppository. So she's honest. That's why I married her. This one, when I was done with it, and I was just playing around, I was more concerned with the sphere. That's when I was trying to learn to turn spheres. But the body, does that not just look a little bit like a bishop on a chess table? It's not really what I was going for. So that was about prototype 4. And you know what? I was having fun because I knew it was a prototype. I didn't care. Now I was a little disappointed I wasted a piece of spalted wood, but you know what? There's more wood rotting that turns to spalt. So, okay. Now here's one. It's a different mechanism. There's about 11 different mechanisms. This is for a crush grind, and that's not what I want to show you how to do today, but this is for a crush grind. And John Telefero, where you at? I turned this at the fair with you, and I lost it. In all of my, there you are. I lost it. And it's beautiful, piece of wood. I don't know that the design is exactly where I was headed, but it's simple. I like simple, okay? And I like simple curves. And if I'd have put a bead on this, would it have not been a sin? I think it would, because there's too much pretty natural stuff in there. You know, that's what God gave us. Why ruin it, you know? Okay. Well then, I was looking at things online, and there's onion-topped peppermills. And this is really more where I was headed in the beginning. And I do kind of like the shape. It's a little bit clunky, to use Doc's term. I think it's a little bit clunky in here, but it's a pretty piece. That's just sanding sealer. That's all it is, I think. It may just be sanded. It's a pretty piece of wood. I took this one in and showed Julie, and she said, oh, that's pretty. And she held it and she went, it's kind of big though. And who am I turning a peppermill for? Am I turning it for me, or am I turning it for my friends and family that I've given a lot of them away to? I'm not turning it for my use, I'm turning it for their use. So now I've got to combine what I want for design into functionality, okay? So this one's a little big. Now I could put this one back on and reduce it and all of that, but I think I like to hang on to it as that reminder. This is a piece of box elder, and I think it's a beautiful piece of wood. And again, this is another example. I think if I'd have put a bead on it, I would have ruined it. Now, if it were plain wood, I probably would be all for it. Again, a little bit more of an onion shape. I've not finished this one yet because I've thought I might go back and bring this in a little bit here. It may be just a little too rounded for me. There's several of us left. How many took the Nick Cook class or the hands-on class? I know John, Mike, Jim, Ernie, Denver. Nick Cook came into town back when we were meeting over at Ray Ward's place, and he turned, I don't know how many projects on a Saturday. What was there, 12, 10, 12, something like that. And then at the end of the day, they raffled them off. And I won the Peppermill. And this was Nick's Peppermill, and this was about the time that I decided, gee, maybe I can do this, because he made it a lot simpler too. And this is his design, and this is what he sells all the time. And I learned a lot from this one. And I learned the simple lines. And I learned that plain wood can be beautiful without a lot of extra things. Now, if you want to put beads on yours, that goes back to, hey, you know, it's your dog, it's your collar. You know, think about it as your design, not someone else's. Okay, well then I got to the point where I kind of found what I wanted in what I was turning. This is Cocobolo. The finish, I need to redo it. It's got a little bit down here where the drip didn't, or there was a drip and I didn't see it. Cocobolo, I was going for a simple grip, back to what my wife had said. One of the ones I'd turned when she told me that it was hard for her to kind of hang on too good and tight, I turned a piece of crotch maple really low, and I'm going to show you how I did that, really thin here. And she held it and she said, oh, this is great. It fits my hand. Well, she's a lady with small hands. So that's when I decided I really kind of like this, okay? This is Indian rosewood. And no, it's pretty straight grained wood, but it's pretty. It's just a pretty piece of wood. This one is, I've showed some people this one before. This is pecan. David Van Giesen and I went to Table Rock, what's that been, David? 5, 6 years ago. And there was a guy that had a bunch of 2x and 3x pecan for sale. And I turned this and I took it in the house and I showed Julie, and she said, see, there's a flaw here, a piece of inclusion there. It's not a flaw. And then this wormhole. And she said, well, won't the peppercorns fall out? And I said, well, you don't shake it this way. And it's not quite big enough for a peppercorn to come out anyway. But see, there's a flaw that can be included. If you've got a piece of wormy wood, you might fill it. I've seen peppermills that are filled with inlace. I've seen them filled with the metal powders, all of that. So that gives you some idea too. Now this one, I really like what Tom's done for me. He milled up a family walnut and a family maple that came off Mom and Dad's place right next to me. Well, this was cut down about probably 7, 8 years ago. It's mulberry. Now, mulberry is yellow. For those of you that have never turned it, it's yellow like Osage in the beginning. And this was, but it has toasted. It's almost like a toasted gold to me. I turned this probably, and this has got pepper in it. I turned this one probably 4 or 5 years ago. This is our daily user. One of, we've got, I think we've got 2 out most of the time. I was happy to have something turned from the tree that I used to eat the berries off of when I was a kid, and the tree that Dad bought my 22 shells because it was right next to the garden. Sorry, anybody that's going to get upset with me, too bad. I was not allowed to shoot cardinals, bluebirds, brown thrushes, some of those birds, but the starlings, they had a price on their head because they were getting down and nipping off the tomato plants. But, you know, that's the kind of thing you get from wood like that. And every time I pick it up at the house, I think of it. I think of that, you know, that was part of my youth there, which is long gone. Let me talk a little bit about how I pick wood and how I get it. Because it's not easy. It's not easy to find dry 3-inch wood. It's more expensive because it is more of a commodity. So what I started doing, I've bought a lot of 3-inch, you know, like baseball bat blanks and 3-inch cherry, maple. I've bought that's kiln dried. And You can have a whole debate over air dried versus kiln dried. And for peppermills, I've used both, and I can't tell a lot of difference. I know that there are some in the room that'll tell me different, but I can't tell much difference. This is a piece of locust, cherry that was kiln dried there. This is hackberry. This is birch. Okay. I decided that I was going to have to create my own wood for peppermills. Now, I was out of work for almost a year, and the wife kept telling me, well, you're working hard to find a job. You need to go to the garage and relax, and you need to go turn. I couldn't do it because while I was out of work, I felt like I was supposed to be working. So the only way I did it was to turn peppermills and boxes and go do a show, because then I felt like I was doing something for the family. But what I did was and a lot of you in the room know about this, I took an old upright freezer and I made my own kiln. I took a 100-watt bulb. I got one of those little food thermometers with the lead, put it in the fridge, drilled holes in the top, drilled holes in the bottom so the moisture could escape, and I put a fan, a little bitty round fan, $5 or $6 fan from Walmart. Put that in the bottom and put my light bulb about middle ways in there, and I learned how to regulate that to about 110 degrees. And you can take a bowl blank or a piece of green wood and wax it. This has been cut after the fact, okay? You can put it in there and slowly dry that stuff in that kiln, and you can weigh it and date it and weigh it and date it until it quits losing weight, and then you're ready to turn it, okay? I've also rounded them out like this, waxed the ends, and put them in that kiln. Now, this piece here, you can see that goes back to 11. I've got a lot of peppermill wood setting in that kiln. I turned it off years ago, but I've got a lot of wood to turn that way. So that's a quicker way than waiting on it to air dry. If you've got some wood that you really want to turn into that, like the family, if you've got family wood or something like that, okay? Again, I like to find dry wood. If I can't, you can dry it yourself, okay?
Larry, what percentage of moisture you end up with after you put it in that milk?
You know, I don't know. When it quits losing weight. Anybody know? 10%? Maybe? 8 to 12? Yeah. Yeah. Now, I do want to say I'm glad that you brought that up because it made me think. I've heard a few people say that have been turning for longer than me that you can turn a peppermill with semi-green wood, with something that's not really dry yet, but the outside's dry. I disagree. If it's wet on the inside and dry on the outside, it is going to move. It's going to split. It might not split, but it can move. And let me show you what will happen. Imagine this. Now, this was dry, obviously, and it wasn't cheap. Imagine this peppermill, and I know it's end grain, and no end grain doesn't move like face grain does, but imagine that ovaling, okay? This, instead of being round, this ovals. Well, I like the tolerances to be fairly close. This one's not got a lot of side to side in the cap with that spigot. I like for it to be fairly tight. I don't want it to be sloppy. I want it to have plenty of room. I don't want it to bind up, but I want it to be fairly close. If that's green and it moves, you're locked. You've suddenly got a friction fit lidded box holding pepper, and that's not what you want. So for those of you that may think you can use green wood, I've only turned about 50 peppermills, somewhere in the neighborhood of 50, and I enjoyed every one of them. It ain't gonna work. It's gonna move or it's gonna split. So you don't want to sell a peppermill to someone. You don't want to give a gift and find out through someone else something went wrong with it, do you? Now, I don't think that I've had that happen yet. I did sell a peppermill at Arts Fest. It was a big peppermill. It was big leaf maple burl, really pretty wood. I had a really high gloss finish on it, and I sold it for a pretty good price. And it was one of these where you put the crush grind mechanism in here and the crush grind mechanism in here, and they're ceramic, and it worked great. And I was doing them in batch. And I'll talk more about that as I start turning here. I was doing them in batch, production minded, okay, not one at a time. And I was successfully gluing up the crush grind mechanisms. Well, that was the first one that I had turned, and I'd put it on the shelf. And I went and got it thinking, well, I really don't want to sell it, but I'll try to sell it. And I put it in the box, sold it. One of the first ones that sold to a couple in Ozark, real nice couple. He calls me about a week later. He said, Larry, we've got a little bit of a problem with the Peppermill. And I thought, uh-oh, finish is what I'm thinking. I said, well, what's wrong? And he said, well, it keeps coming apart. That was the only one that I hadn't glued together. So I drove to Ozark, picked it up, took it home, glued it up, took it back. So that's something else you don't want to do when you're selling or giving away a gift. I have given a lot of them as gifts. We're coming up on Christmas. I've given a lot of them as gifts. It's something that's going to be on their counter all the time. So if you want them to remember you, it's one of those things you can do. Marking a blank. Now this is a piece of kiln-dried maple. And if you've not got this little device, it's handy. Little cheapy punch that you can get at, how many of you call it Freight Harbor? It's not Pro Bass, it's Bass Pro. It's not Freight Harbor, it's Harbor Freight. I don't know, how much are these? I've got 3 or 4, 6, $7. Grizzly carries them, Pete? Huh? Yeah. I've got 3, maybe 4 of them, but I couldn't find one for love nor money. You don't have to have this, but it makes life easier. And you can use a pen to mark it. You can use a sharp edge of anything. This is, again, you don't have to be super precise if you start with a 3-inch blank. Now, nobody's asked me the question, well, can't you use smaller than a 3-inch blank? Yes, you can. The smallest I've used, I think, was probably 2.5. Your largest hole is 1 5/8 inches. Now, the reason why I've not used smaller wood is because the design I'm going for has got that Rubenesque. It's got that curve, and you can't get that when you're real thin. But if you want to make, and I've made a few of them that are pretty much just tall and straight, you know, maybe kind of the Rudy Olsnick shape, just a little bit. I've done that. You can start with a smaller piece. There's a friend of mine I want to make one for so she can carry it in her purse because she's a pepper fanatic. I've just not done it yet. And I've got the perfect little 2 or 2 1/4 inch blank figured piece of walnut. I'm going to make her one out of that. But, you know, I use 3-inch to start with because it gives me more opportunity to find what I'm looking for. Okay, so once you've got that marked, find the middle, mark your spot. Okay, then when you line it up on the lathe, you find that mark, and you're gonna, you know, not all of you have turned spindle stuff like this. A lot of you have. I know this is probably old hat, but I'm kind of showing you soup to nuts. You're gonna do the same thing over here so you can find center. Okay, is this Nova's? I know several of you have got it. Craft Supply sells it. You've got circles, you've got other angles there. You've got gauge here for your gouges to check your bevel, okay? But you don't have to have that. Just get you a straight edge, get you a pencil, do the same thing, okay? But try to find your center so you can get the most use out of the wood you're using.
Typically you work without blanks if you're making a peppermill?
I'm getting to that right now. You're on the same page. It depends on the size peppermill I want, okay? Now, I'm going to go ahead and steal my own thunder. One of the reasons why I didn't want to turn peppermills was because I think this is an 8-inch peppermill. I was afraid I wasn't going to get all the measurements right so my cap would fit. There's an easy fix for that. Get close. And then I'll show you in a little bit how you measure this shaft and you change the shaft. And that takes the biggest fear out of peppermills for me, okay? I didn't have a 10-inch mechanism. I had all 8s and smaller. This is a little bit large, I think, for a peppermill. Now, some people, and that goes back to your preference, some people want a grand, big peppermill. You've gone to the restaurants and you've seen the great big long ones. Well, I've got two 24-inch mechanisms that I've just not finished up yet. I want to make a couple of big ones too. But what I found in selling peppermills at Arts Fest, my small ones were all gone. I had a few of the big ones left. And typically it's the lady that's going to pick it out, and ladies tend, I don't want to draw with a broad brush here, but tend to go for the daintier or the smaller. So I found that the 8-inch peppermill seemed to move quicker for me. But again, you know, there are some people that want the big statement on their countertop, and that's fine, and that's kind of what this one does. I'm going to show you how I cut and prepare, and then we're going to take another blank, the kind of cooking show style.
So if you have you're going to make an 8-inch peppermill, how big is your blank? How long?
I'm going to start with probably a 9-inch at least.
So an inch over the size of
Yeah, well, and again, I'll show you here. Actually, I'll show you one that I've already got. I haven't dressed myself in a long time. Yeah. Glenn, I never worried. I got to the point where I didn't worry with what I started with. And there's a reason for that. What I found with my figured woods, as I roughed them out, this is a peppermill blank. I don't know whether it's a 10-inch peppermill or a 4-inch peppermill. I rough it out, and then I look at the figure. And I decide where I want my cap. I have turned peppermills with this kind of void, and I have sealed it with super glue, and they've been pretty. I had one that actually had a little bit of bark. It was kind of like this other blank I had. It had been milled, and they'd left kind of that roughed edge, and there was just a little bit of bark that was there, and I left it, and it was really pretty. It was kind of a void. So what I do is this is typically larger than I start with. I'm usually starting with a 12-inch blank. Some I've got are 10, and if I've got them that are, I think this one's 15 or 16, I like to rough them out like this and then decide what I'm going to do with it. And, oh, I brought it up here. Here's an example of where I'm going with this, okay? I also like to turn boxes, and a really good dimension for boxes is a 3-inch blank, okay? So you're looking at this. I decided that I didn't really want to risk that because that might be the wrong kind of flaw to have. It might end up being a crack later. I decided this, and there's a crack right there. I hadn't seen that till now. Hey, there's light in here. I'm not used to light in the shop. Okay. I had decided this was going to be the body, this was going to be the cap, and I'm going to part this off and save that for boxes or for whatever else I might decide. You know, the other thing that Osage is really good for, is that showing up good there? I love the end grain in Osage. It's good for your pendants. Okay? For those of you that have turned the jewelry, I think it's beautiful, just natural. Maybe put a little bit of a design in with whatever tool, whatever edge, maybe the decorating elf or one of the knurling tools. I think it's beautiful. There's a lot of wood that the end grain I think is prettier than the face grain. But that's how I do it. Okay? There's nothing that says that this is the right way. It's just what I've found that I like, because that way I get a little bit more canvas to choose from with the wood. Okay? When I start shaping the body, I use whatever works best for me at the time. And again, I'm going to say this, and I know that there are those of you that are not carbide fans, and I know that there are some of you that started just with carbide that are not high-speed fans. I've learned to use what works at the moment. If it's the tool that will do the job for me, that's going to be the one I reach for. Okay? And in this situation, the square easy wood cutter works for me the best. The other one that would work is this diamond parting tool. Now, I didn't blue it, I promise. I bought this one secondhand. You sharpen this on your Wolverine or your grinder just at the right, you know, I've got the platform, I've got a Robo Rest. Have any of you seen it? It's a guy out in Oregon, I believe. He's got the degrees set by 5. You put a little cotter through it. I've used it for my scraper, so I have the same thing every time. But you put it on your platform. Put it on your platform and grind it this way. Okay? And that's sharp. And I've used this a lot for parting. I've not used it to make tenons. And that's basically what I'm going to do here. What I'm looking for is to find my tenon, my spigot, and a place to part it. Okay? Everything else doesn't matter right now. Okay? You'll see that I'm not true here. Now when I make my tenon, oh, my face shield is dirty. When I make my tenon, I'm going to actually use, now I own an easy wood chuck with dovetail jaws. This is a stronghold chuck, and if Ernie had his Vic Mark here, I'd use it. I'm using this one because it's got a flat jaw, or a flatter jaw. And when I'm cutting one of these peppermill bodies, I don't want to waste wood at the tenons because I don't want to take any more out of there now than I have to, because I want to have room for that for later. In case I wanted, oh gee, I cut that dovetail a little too deep. The other thing is I'm going to actually have a little bit of an oversized tenon than what I would for a bowl or for a hollow vessel. Spindle orientation, and with what we're doing here, I think you can be a little bit wider. The stronghold, the one way tells me the compression, Mike, you may know, on the number 2 jaws, it's like 2.5 to 3 1/4 or something like that. So you got some play there. Okay, if I'm turning a bowl or something that's going to be bigger spinning at me, I'm obviously going to try to get my jaws on a tenon closer to that. Thanks, sir. Closer to that. So it's got more surface area grabbing. Okay? With what I'm doing here, I'm going to be boring, and there's less torque that this piece is hitting. So I'm not quite as concerned with that. Okay? So I'm going to get close. Now, George Clark showed us this years ago, and this is what one of his cool tools that he talked about. And after I saw him use it, I had to have one. Galbert caliper. Okay? You'll see me use it here in a minute. It's not free, but I've used it a lot and I really like it because you can use it while you're turning because it's thin enough and if you're careful. Okay? So, what I was talking about is you see over here where that is out of, it's not flush. Okay, it's not a square corner yet. And I want to make sure when I put that in my tenon that I don't have any offset. It needs to be flat to the jaw. So the first thing I'm going to do, I knew that was going to be the next question. Right now I am at about 1962. Actually I was born in 64, so I'm close. Okay, that's all I need to be a flat jaw, or go into the flat part of the chuck, right? Okay, I'm going to do the same thing over here. Well, gee, Larry, why'd you move your tool rest to do that? So I don't forget. And that's enough as well. Okay, so now I've got a flat surface for that chuck to bottom out. So if it does bottom out, actually I don't want to bottom out on this particular item. Some things you might. But so now I'm going to say, well, gee, which one's going to be the cap? Which end's going to be the cap? What do y'all think? Okay, that side's not as interesting. Is this the cap or is this the cap? This? Okay. So, I'm using a stronghold chuck. And the interesting thing about this easy wood cutter is it is just about perfect for these jaws. Okay, so the size of that cutter is just a little bit smaller than as if it were to bottom out. Okay, so if I cut my tenon, and you'll see I'm creeping over with this tool, you can cut in or across. It's flat on the tool rest. It's not at an angle. They are not advertised to do that. Like any other tool, you don't want to start here and do that. It needs to be flat on the tool rest and level to the floor, and I don't know whether I am or not, I think I'm close. And it needs to be on center to cut the best. Now you can get it down here and do a little bit of shear work, not as well with a square cutter, but with the radius. You can do some of that, but I'm cutting to the side here for a reason. Remember I said I wanted a square tenon for this chuck? The other thing I'm going to do, it is not a dovetailed jaw, but I'm going to put just a slight, maybe 1 degree or 2 degree slope on that. So then when you squeeze it into the chuck, if the tenon's going the other way, it's going to push it out, even with the serrations, okay? So, how do I figure the cap? Well, I know that by the time I'm done up here, there's going to be maybe an 1/8 waist, so I want to give myself some room. So it's about 3 inches, it's a little less. So I'm going to try to give myself, for the cap itself, maybe 3 3/8, something like that. Again, close. This is not rocket surgery. It helps to have a sharper marker than this, okay? Okay, so I'm going to come in here with my lathe nice and slow, and I'm going to say, well, right about there. Okay, that's my cap. Okay, now I want to find my spigot. But you know what? I'm always working on the safe. I'm going to make room for a tenon right here. And then my spigot, which this one's a little long. Don't make fun of me. My spigot really needs to be probably about half of that. So 3/8 at least, because when you're loosening and tightening a peppermill, you don't want it to be loose enough that they can ever see the shaft, okay? So again, I'm going to be approximate. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, well, my spigot's probably going to be about like that, okay? Then I'm going to have room to part. And then I'm going to have a tenon and a tenon, okay? So this is some of the hardest part of making a peppermill, is just remembering where you need to put your tenons, okay? Okay, now I'm cutting another tenon that I'm probably not going to use, but it's my backup tenon. Remember I said I needed my spigot, and I also need a place to part. So I'm kind of using my cutter here, again, as a guide. And I'm plunging straight in, just nice and slow. Now you hear that bounce if this were not figured ash. If it were straight grain cherry or straight grain maple, it wouldn't be bouncing. Okay, now I've got a tenon if I need it, in case something goes wrong. I've got the tenon for the cap. Right here's where I'm going to part. This is actually going to be the tenon to hold that into the chuck to drill. So it's a little bit, you'll see that it's kind of square, but I'm going to, again, just for safety's sake, I'm going to give it just a little bit, a slight angle. And you should never move your tool rest while the lathe is moving. Okay, and I'm going to come down here, push it in just a little bit. See, I've got just a little bit more dovetail than I want, so I'm going to bring that back. Okay, and then I'm done. Now I have to part. Now I have a plethora of parting tools. I didn't bring my, that was my big word for the day. Did you like that one? I looked it up last night. I was going to use extrapolate, but I couldn't find the definition. Again, this is I promise, IT. This one I got dirty from parting and I need to clean it up, but I put a little edge on it last night. I've also got D-Ways, and I really like D-Ways parting tool, by the way. Good guy. So I'm going to come in. Now I'm going to cut 2. Everybody know why I'm cutting 2? Because I don't want to be at the slightest angle this way or that way with just one cut, or it can rip it out of my hand. Don't ask me how I know. I knew better when it happened, but I did it anyway. And I didn't even do it on this big a piece. Okay? So you see I'm working both sides down. Now, I would probably go farther than that at home, but I really don't want to show off that much. Which also means I don't want to get caught breaking one on my face. How many of you have used hacksaw on the lathe? Okay. Alan Lacer does a demo where he shows you how to use a bimetal blade to part off while it's spinning. Now, I've done a little bit of that. What I prefer to do is get it down pretty thin and just cut it off. Now, I know that's not brave, and I know that's not flashy, but I've got this far with it. I don't want to break it. I don't want to ruin my face. My wife still lies to me and tells me she likes it. Okay, so I'm just going to get it to that point. Now, if this were the tenon on the bottom of your bowl, you wouldn't want to do that, would you? Okay, because I just tore the grain. Well, I'm going to drill it away anyway, so it really doesn't matter. I'm going to drill the body first, okay? Then I'm going to drill the cap. So, what I was doing when I was making a bunch of them is I would part them and I would mark them. I'd go put them on a shelf. And I'd get another one out, cut the tenons, part it, mark them, go put them on a shelf. And if you're doing a bunch of them of one wood, you better, because you'll get them mixed up. And I've not done that, believe it or not, but you'll get them mixed up and the grain's not going to look right, okay? So mark them if you're going to make, say you're going to make, where's he at? If you're going to make 6 for your daughters for Christmas, make sure you mark them. And you better make them all the same if you're making them for your family, or they will know. Is I'm going to drill the body from both ends. And I'm going to drill the cap from both ends. Now, there are tutorials all over the place, and some of you have turned peppermills, and you may say, well, you don't have to do that. No, you don't have to do that. But what I don't like is when the drill bit drifts, and invariably it will. There are a lot of drill bits that I'm going to be using. Craft Supplies, there's another piece of paper, Michael. Okay, Craft Supplies gives you some directions, and they're pretty good directions. Again, they're a sponsor of our club. And this is where I've bought all my mills from. And I buy the stainless steel ones because I want them to last. Now the shaft, I believe, is aluminum, but everything else is stainless, okay? They give you some dimensions to go by, but I found that I do things just a little bit differently after doing it their way a few times. Now, a little bit on your Forstner bits. If you turn too fast, you will dull your bit. That's a lot of surface that it's getting ready to bore on, right? So for this size bit, this is a 1 5/8. For this size bit, I'm not really true there, but that's okay because it's just barely off. I'm not going to worry about that. Okay, now I'm at about 400. Okay. You want to hold your chuck. Sorry, because it can spin on you. Now this is one of the things that is fairly critical in your measurements. And at home, I would have my air hose right here. Zzz, clear those chips. And go again. It gets hot. How many of you have gone? Those of you that are laughing have, I know. Is that everybody? Almost everybody? It's always funny when you catch the other turner doing it. Oh, I've never done that. That was hilarious. I'm glad you did that. Do what? Okay, now this needs to be a 1/2 inch. Okay? It needs to be a 1/2 inch for this bottom mechanism. This is deeper than it needs to be, but it has to be about a 1/2 inch. And that's just about what I've got there. Okay? So it can be as little as. I have made them to make a piece a little bit taller with a smaller mechanism. I've made this a little bit deeper because I've got a lot of body here. So that gives you some room for error. Again, make it easy. Okay? Okay, that's drill bit number 1. Yes, at least a 1/2 inch. And again, their instructions are good for the mechanism measurements. What I decided was I wanted to do things a little bit differently. This is the 1 1/16. Oh, the other thing, and I think I did it with the last bit, don't always put your Forstner bits all the way down in, because some of the shanks on these things go a little bit deeper than they should, and it can cause that to be just a little bit off. If you drilled and had it squeak, everybody thinks that's because your lathe's not true. Sometimes it's because you've got your bit in too far. Okay? Now, this needs to be 1 1/16 inches to fit this piece of the mechanism here. Okay, and I'll show you that later. And you'll see that, let me show you that now. This is going to go in the bottom of the blank. Okay? I lost a screw. I've had a screw loose for years. It has to be 1 1/16, or it's going to squeeze too much. Okay? So, my 1 1/16, I'm going to envision that right up about here. I'm going to go a little bit deeper than I need. Not a lot, but a little. I lost a screw. Lost a spring. Okay. Thanks, sir. I lost a $100 bill down there a while ago, too, if you'd get it for me. Okay. Now I'm going to leave my face shield off. Believe it or not, while I'm drilling at home, I do wear it. Granted, there's not probably, now I'm going to go a little faster because this is a smaller diameter Forstner bit. I'm up to about 666. Kidding. 712. Okay. Now that's not as deep as I need to be, but for the sake of time, I'm going to lie to you and tell you it is. Okay? So now, what most instructions will tell you the next step is to use an extension for your Forstner bit. And I did that on several. And what I ran into was a lot of movement, because this is out here and this bit is going to chase the grain. It's going to chase that end grain. So if you've got figure or just a plain blank where the grain goes this way, it's going to want to pull that way. Okay? That will work. But I want it to be a little truer than that when I'm done. I've got 4 of them. I've got them in different sizes. I bought number 2 Morse taper bits that fit straight in your quill. Now, is it going to flex? Yes, it's going to flex too. But the difference between it and a Forstner bit is you've got less surface area here. So it's going to pull easier. I'm a firm believer that this won't pull as much. Okay? Craft Supply. Craft Supply carries them. You can buy them other places too. but Craft Supply does sell them. I've got them in 1 inch, 3/4, 5/8, half, I think. No, I don't believe so. I'm not sure you can buy them that way. I did a lot of research on bits, trying to find carbide, knowing that it would be cooler when drilling. See, there's quite a little bit of wobble in that. But the thing about it is I think it's more consistent. Now with this one, I've got my air hose and I'm going and I'm keeping it clean the whole time. Obviously, I can't do that here. Okay, so I'm done there. I've got the bottom drilled. Now I'm going to flip it around.
You're trying to go all the way through to that side?
No, I'm going to go halfway. That's what I'm getting ready to say is that actually on this size is a little bit deeper than I would have gone with that bit. But see, now I'm going to flip it. That's my bottom. This is the top of the body. And again, you'll notice that my tenon is bigger than the jaws, right? This would not be a good thing to do with a bowl because I'm touching here, here, and here. I'm not getting as much compression. But again, since I'm boring, it's not as much torque. It's not as much pressure trying to flip that out of the blank, okay? But I'm going to put the little washer that holds the shaft in here. I'm going to recess it. And I don't want to do that with too much thin wall out here. So what I decided, after about my 10th or 12th peppermill, I was going to make this hole here just a little bit bigger because it really doesn't get in the way of my design. Now, if you had a real thin one here, it would. So I'm going to drill 2 holes. I'm going to drill this one for the spigot, then I'm going to go back to my 1-inch bit. I'm getting close to my 4-hour mark. Okay. Okay. Now I came here planning not to finish a peppermill, so don't think I'm going to go that long. We're talking about the hardest part of the peppermill. The rest is on you. Okay? So now, this is, I believe, an 1 inch and 3/8 bit. It could be whatever you want it to be. And you'll see here in a minute when I show you on the cap. Okay, remember the heat. I'm a little fast. For this size Forstner bit, I'm at 426. Now, this is my recess for that spigot. So I can't make my spigot any taller, longer than what I'm drilling this hole. Okay, but you saw by the design that I typically turn, I still got quite a little bit of room up here before I get into the true neck of the piece. So I can go a little bit deeper if I want. Okay? Now I'm going to go back to my 1-inch bit. Now again, 1-inch bit, I can go a little faster. I'm going to go to about, that's probably a little quick, about 600. Okay, now I'm going to, you see the wobble, but what I'm really trying to achieve with this bit is not so much the diameter of the hole as in matching the other side. Okay? Did that backwards. I'm trying to make it so there's no ridge in the middle where it meets, and this bit will allow you to do that, where a Forstner bit will just push fiber. This one will cut on a side. That's why I said the wings are sharp. Okay, so I'm done with that one. What I would do at this point, and I would have done it to the other side first. I'll show you on this side. I'm going to treat, at this point, I'm going to treat this top as if it's going to be finished. I'm going to take one of the Radius carbide tools, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to face that off. And now I'm going to sand it. Okay? This is ash. My ego's not in the way. I'm probably going to have to start with 100, maybe less. But you know what? I don't care. It's tool. So I'm going to try to keep my flat shape, and I'm going to sand this up to 400. Okay? So this side's done. For those of you who've not demonstrated, what I'm learning already that others have said is you're not at home. Okay, so when I put this away, I'm going to have sanded this side, and I'm going to have sanded this to a finish grit, because I'm going to finish it between centers. But this part's done. Okay? So now I've got to drill the cap. Remember, this is my spigot. This is the top of my cap. Okay? So I'm going to drill the spigot side first. And I do things a little bit differently. All of us do. We're woodturners. Okay? I'm going to go ahead, since this is a little bit more than I want, I'm going to flatten this down a little bit for the bit, because it will walk if you don't. Okay? So I've got that done. And now I want to come back in, and I'm going to use, the instructions tell you to use a 9/32. Okay? I'm going to do things just a little bit differently, and I'll explain more here in a minute. I'm going to use an 11/32 on this side. And just like with the body, I'm going to do more work than I have to do, but I'm doing it because I find that it's truer, the holes. Okay? So I'm going to drill my 11/32. That's way too fast. I'm going to drill it at about 12, 1300, something like that. And I'm going to go till I hear that squeak. Okay? And I'm going to be done. That's not the shaft hole. It is the shaft hole, but you'll see here in a minute what I mean. Now, this is a 7/8 Forstner bit. What Nick Cook did, was he recessed that plate. The fit and finish is just nicer. Okay? So I'm going to make it so that lays inside something. So I'm going to bring it up a little bit slower. It's a bigger bit. About 600 is what I try to do. Okay? That's it. Now, just to make sure, that looks a lot thicker than this, so I don't have to worry about it, but that's going to fit in there. Okay? So I'm done with that. Now, doing more work than I probably need to do. I'm going to flip it around, but I'm going to flip it around for a reason. I made a peppermill out of crotch maple that was gorgeous. The wood was absolutely some of the craziest grained I'd ever seen. When I assembled it, where this went was more like that. Because when I drilled from this side, my bit had wobbled, and I didn't realize in turning it, because it didn't really show up that much, but it was off probably, I don't know, a 1/16, and it looked terrible. It was beautiful. I couldn't give it away. I didn't want to give it away. I was ashamed of it. So what I've done is I've decided that Ruth Niles is my friend. This is the Ruth Niles bottle stopper mandrel. You can always use that joiner plate. Okay? That's the size hole this is. Okay? I put this on there just like I would a bottle stopper. And I drill that hole from the other side. Now I'm going to go all the way to the bottom where it bottoms out, just like with a chuck, so it'll square up. And it may not quite do that. Okay? Now I'm going to come back with the appropriate 9/32. I told you this was boring. Okay? Come back with the 9/32. I'm going to make those holes meet just like I did before. I'm a little off here. This happens in every demo, right? Okay? Okay, now, I'm not going to finish the cap today, but when I do, I'm going to mount this cap on this mandrel, not in a chuck. And the reason why I do that, because I like to turn spheres or near spheres, it gives me more room to work than as if it were in a chuck. Okay? So, what I would do is I would grab my live center, bring it up here, and these little caps that go on top, these are close to a 1/2 inch. Okay? My one-way live center is close. Okay? So I save my last few cuts is when I take my tailstock back. Okay? I'm going to bring that up. I'm going to shape whatever shape I want. Then the last cut, or the last sanding even, because it's pretty tight. And then I'm going to take that little cap and I'm going to match it up. Now I did use at one time with a 60-degree live center, I did use a 1/2 inch washer, outside diameter, and it acted like a bushing. Now I typically don't turn the cap until after I've turned the body. The reason for that is I want to be able to shape the body and let it decide what it wants to be. Okay? Now, how many of you have got the Beal collet chuck or something like it? Okay, a couple of you. It's handy. I don't use it a lot. This is where I use it. I'll show you real quick. This little mandrel system I bought from somebody out on the Woodturners forum. I don't think they make it still, but it fits perfectly, the 1 1/16. And that's how I turn between centers. Okay? But that you don't have to use that. Let me show you the easier way. Or maybe not the easier way, the cheaper way. You get you a waste block. This is a high-priced, really expensive pine. Why do you use pine, Larry? It compresses. Cheap, but it's also softer than anything you're going to make a peppermill out of. So you're not going to mar this by putting it in here. Okay? On the other side, I have my cone, my large cone for my one-way live center. Okay? You can also use, I think a 60-degree live center will work. Okay, so I'm going to put this here. I'm going to bring this up here, tighten it up. That's not quite, this is off. I would reshape this every time because it does move when you take it in and out of the chuck, since it does compress. Reshape this before you start, and then you shape your body. Once that body is shaped, this is why I haven't turned the cap yet. Okay? I'm going to come in here. This is already sanded. This is already sanded. So now I'm going to shape the body how I want. That 1-inch hole buys me just a little bit more for the grip. The 5/8 inch bit gives you even more room if you want to make it a smaller neck. Okay? So I turn the body, sand it, I'm done. Okay? I put this cap back on. I put the mandrel or the Niles mandrel back in, bring my live center up. I shape the cap. Okay? And then my body's done. Okay? So, assembly is not tough. What you do want to do, and I'm not going to assemble one because Tom wants lunch. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to take this little device here, that housing that's got to go down in, okay? And I'm going to take Doc's center punch. I'm going to take that center punch with this centered, so then I make sure that this is correct. Then I punch it. Then I take it to my drill press, not my hand drill, because I don't trust myself. And I believe it is a 3/32 bit that you drill a pilot hole, okay? Then you're ready to assemble that in. I do the same thing on this end. I take that punch or pen, you could use a pen or a pencil, but I mark those. See how that's just a little bit off? I used a bigger bit there. I want to find center on that. Mark it, take it to my drill press. Very carefully, since you've already shaped it. You could do this before you shape it, for that matter, because you've already drilled that recess. You pilot hole it, then you can put your screws right in. This is how you assemble it, okay? Your mechanism here, these instructions are easy to follow for this part, okay? You've got your mechanism here with the 2 screws. You got your 2 screws for the cap there. Now, how do I know how long my peppermill needs to be? This is what kept me from making peppermills. How do I measure to make this shaft fit? Now, I really needed the longer mechanism to show you this, okay? But what I do is I go ahead and assemble everything as if it were finished, okay? Now, you don't have to screw that, nor can you screw that all the way down, okay? For your pepper grind, you only need about a full turn and a half, and that will give you a fine or a coarse grind, okay? So you've got a lot of room here. But what I do is I go ahead and assemble it, and I let that longer shaft than my peppermill stick out the bottom, and I mark it where it should be. I give just a little bit more play on this end, give it just a little bit more rope. I mark it, and then I take the shaft to a vise, and I cut with my hacksaw at the mark. I flip it around, hold it in the vise, take my ball peen hammer, and re-flange that. And then you can have a 7 3/8 inch tall peppermill. It doesn't have to be an 8-inch peppermill, okay? So that's probably what keeps everybody from turning a peppermill. Any questions?
Quick question on finish. Do you finish the inside as well?
Good question. I sand the inside. That's something I wanted to cover, but I didn't feel like we had time. What I'll do is that while I'm holding that in the chuck, when I'm finishing the bottom, when I'm sanding here, not your finger. I knew better than to try that. You get a smaller dowel, wrap you some heavy grit, like 60-80 grit. Doesn't have to be 220, it's the inside of a peppermill. And you take the rough spots out. I'm not worried about a finish on the inside. I'm worried about chips of wood coming out in a pepper grind when somebody has got it as a gift. So I sand it, stop the lathe, and feel inside where that joint, where that blade went together. And this one's actually not bad because that's a good bit. But I sand it just enough. Then I will use either Mylan sanding sealer or 50/50 shellac and alcohol, denatured alcohol, to seal it on the inside. I don't really want to get it out here, so I try to be really careful, and I don't spin it on, but I do use a paper towel and just rub it around in there and let it set up. And then on the outside, I'll use whatever finish I want. I typically do not like lacquer. It's a peppermill. You want something that's durable. I've done everything from a wipe-on poly to, I really like this stuff. General Finishes, Woodturners finish. I've even sprayed a little bit of automotive poly. I really like that finish, but I don't like the smell. And I didn't want to respirate up, okay? Till I like it. How many coats do I use is the question. Till I like it. With this, I did this again in batch. I had them on big dowels like this, the caps side by side, and I would come through and this dries really quickly, like within an hour you can reapply. I probably did 7 coats, probably, but it's easy. It's an easy wipe on. With the other polys, I've done as little as 2, just to knock the burr off the top. Do I sand in between? Just enough to take the ridges off. Anything else? Yes. It's going to be a good one, I can tell.
How much different is the salt grinder?
Salt will eat up stainless, so you want to make sure that you do get, the question is the difference between a pepper mill and a salt mill. The salt will eat up everything but a ceramic. So you can buy the same kit from Craft Supply or any of the other purveyors, but remember Craft Supply is a sponsor, you can buy the same kit in ceramic for salt. And I've made sets where I had, you know, I'd make the peppermill a little bit taller and the salt mill a little squattier, and people like that. Okay? Not all peppercorns are truly pepper. The pink and the reds are not real pepper. Black, white, green. So, any other questions?